Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Creepy Stories with Kyleen. I hope you enjoyed my last creepy story about the ship that seemed to vanish without a trace. I'll let you know after this story the origins of that mysterious ship. This week's story is about a group of friends who thought it would be a fun evening exploring an old abandoned estate, and they almost didn't escape with their lives. In Grimsby, Ontario, there is a grand estate that was originally owned by the McLean family in the 1930s, and it was said to be cursed, with strange occurrences happening there throughout the year. One particular tragedy occurred when the youngest McLean heir, a boy named Alexander, disappeared without a trace. Years later, 4 teenage friends who had an interest in ghost hunting and the dark arts decided to explore the abandoned estate. They had heard stories of the cursed property and they wanted to see for themselves. When they first arrived, it was just before sundown, and they thought they would start in the garden before there was no more daylight left. As they walked through the overgrown gardens, they noticed a strange mist that seemed to seep out of the garden. It was thick and it was hard to see each other through it. They also noticed a mild scent of decay, and they began to feel like they were being watched. They felt a bit uneasy, but they decided to push on. They then moved on to the main house. They were immediately overcome with a sense of dread when they walked in. The walls were covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs, and the air was musty and stale. As they explored the first floor, they stumbled upon a locked room. Despite their efforts to open it, the door wouldn't budge. Then suddenly, they heard a whispering voice in their ears. It sounded like a child's voice, and it seemed to be coming from behind the locked door. So one of the teens, her name was Emma, decided she was going to try and pick the lock with her bobby pin. As she worked on the lock, all of a sudden she felt a cold breeze brush past her, and when she turned around, she saw this figure standing at the end of the hallway. She instantly lost all color in her face, and she was staring at a young boy. He had dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He was wearing a white shirt, and he was covered in dirt. She let out a screech, and she was frozen in place with fear. Emma's friends couldn't see what she was staring at, but they could feel a presence. The 3 other friends stared at Emma, waiting to see what her reaction would be. Another girl named Jessica told Emma to try and speak to the boy, so she took a deep breath and asked him his name. He whispered back, "I am Alexander. Do you know where my brothers are?" He then proceeded to tell her that he was playing hide and seek with his brothers. He was hiding in the garden, and the last thing he remembers was being snatched away by a figure in the mist. All of a sudden, they heard a crash come from the basement. They all jumped up. Emma looked back at the boy, but he was gone. The friends should have turned around then, but they lived for this kind of thrill. So they found the staircase leading down to the basement. As they descended, they could hear strange noises echoing throughout the empty halls. It sounded like someone was dragging chains across the floor. When they reached the bottom of the staircase, they found themselves in a large room filled with antique furniture that was covered in cobwebs. At the far end of the room, there was a dusty old mirror. As they approached it, they noticed that their reflections weren't quite right. Emma's reflection was grinning wickedly at her, and her friends' reflections were all twisted and distorted. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, and the room was filled with a blinding light and a high-pitched hum that pierced their ears. They all put their hands over their ears and screamed out in pain. When the light faded, the group found themselves back in the main hallway. The locked door had surprisingly been opened, and they could see a ghostly figure standing inside. It was a woman, and she was beckoning them to come closer. She had a sheer cloth over her head, and they couldn't see her face. As they approached closer, they could see that the woman was holding an old, shriveled-up teddy bear, and she began repeating the words, "I will find you. I will find you. I will find you," over and over again. And then she got louder and louder, and to the point where she was screaming, "I will find you! I will find you! I will find you!" And then she dropped the teddy bear and lifted up the cloth that was covering her face. And to everyone's surprise, it was Emma. She had a huge big grin on her face and piercing evil eyes staring at them. The friends screamed and looked at each other, and they realized Emma wasn't beside them anymore. They looked back at the possessed Emma and she fell to the floor. She was motionless. The friends ran to her and shook her awake, and she was out of it and didn't remember what had just happened. And then they looked over to where the teddy bear fell, and the teddy bear was gone. The whole estate seemed to wake up. The walls started shaking, doors slammed open and shut. They could hear children laughing all around them, and the group grabbed Emma and helped her up to her feet, and they could hear the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls, and they knew they had to get out of there before it was too late. They ran towards the exit. They found themselves face to face with this figure in the mist. It was a tall, dark figure with glowing eyes and long, clawed fingers, and it let out a bone-chilling howl, and the group ran for their lives. When they emerged from the estate, they were covered in sweat and dirt. Emma looked up, and she saw Alexander standing in the distance. He was standing in the middle of the garden, surrounded by mist. The dark figure was standing behind him, grinning at her and her friends. Alexander looked scared. She looked to her left and she saw a shovel. She felt the urge to pick it up, and when she did, the demon was all of a sudden standing behind them. So Emma ran towards where Alexander was standing and she began to dig quickly. And when she did, she uncovered a small pile of bones. And then it was like the curse was lifted. The mist began to recede, and the horrible sounds coming from the house began to settle. She found Alexander. The sound of the children laughing in the distance began to get quieter and quieter. Relieved, the group got in the car, eager to leave. Emma was drained, so they laid her down in the back seat. She felt cold, so her friends laid a jacket over top of her. As they drove down the long driveway, Emma formed a big evil grin on her face, and she eerily whispered in a demonic voice, "I will find you." Thanks for watching this week's creepy stories. I hope you're enjoying them. Last week's story about Le Griffin was actually based on a true story, and to this day it's still unknown what had happened to that ship. Some people have claimed to have found the wreckage in the Great Lakes, but it's still unproven. Let me know what you thought about this week's story. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe. Bye guys!